was the early 1930s. They arrived in Switzerland by the thousands. They were Jewish, and they were afraid. They brought jewelry and gold. They hid their money in coat linings and body cavities.
Because they thought that if they could save their money, they could somehow bargain to save themselves. They really thought that they still had a negotiable position if they had something to negotiate with. And that's why they wanted to get it out, because they assumed that that could be their only ticket to safety.
Swiss banks profited from their terror, just as later they would profit from the war itself.
There are couriers that tell you stories about how they had to secret the money in parts of in their body. They had to hide it, and they literally risked their lives to get it there.
Bank secrecy laws enticed thousands of Jewish customers. The Nazis wanted their lives. Swiss banks wanted their money.
Billions. The entire wealth of Europe was going into Switzerland. It was the only safe place to put money.
Einmal wird unsere Geduld zu Ende sein und dann wird den Juden das freche Lügenmaul gestopft werden.
The Nazis destroyed synagogues and likened Jews to rats. Even when the Nazis made it a crime for a Jew to hold a bank account, the money kept coming.
That was risking the life. If you was caught, you lost everything, but you lost, in fact, your life. That's absolutely clear.
Die Folge noch einmal in einen Weltkrieg zu stürzen. Dann wird das Ergebnis nicht die Bolschevierung der Erde und damit das nicht des Judentums sein, sondern die Vernichtung der jüdischen Rasse in Europa.
By the end of the war, the banks could assume that most of their Jewish customers were dead. Some Holocaust survivors have spent a lifetime trying to retrieve money from the Swiss banks.
What has been taken from such vulnerable people, such a vulnerable time, and for 50 years, to me it is simply theft, right? Simply theft.
The Nazis didn't discriminate. Rich and poor died in the Warsaw Ghetto, nameless, their identities stripped away, their fortunes lost.
Most of the time I remember spending in an attic, hiding, because there were constantly calls for Jewish children to be, since they were not part of the working force, were just, dead weight, to be exterminated. And so I had to be hidden all the time.
Starvation was everywhere.
Dead people on the sides, just decomposing bodies. I still remember the terrible odor.
Determined to buy them freedom, her mother tried to bribe a Nazi official.
Telling the superintendent that she was going to write him a letter withdrawing 3,000 gold marks. Now, I don't know whether he ever did it, but I know that he denounced her and she was sent to Treblinka.
From where was she going to withdraw this money?
From the Swiss bank.
From a Swiss bank account?
Mm-hmm.
Her mother died. She survived. After the war, like other survivors of the Holocaust, she tried in Switzerland to recover her parents' money. It was a country glistening with prosperity, eerily untouched by war. The rest of Europe was in ruins. This was a day the banks may have hoped would never come. Shabby survivors of the Holocaust were coming back for their money. Bankers demanded documents they must have known were impossible to provide.
Death certificates, which is sort of so preposterous, and I think so insulting. Surely they knew what was going on.
The bankers seriously asked you for death certificates?
Yeah, definitely.
For your parents who'd been killed in the camp?
She, like countless others, was left empty-handed.
There really was no trace of your parents?
No. No, absolutely not. Smoke.
Today in New York, the Swiss banks are being sued for $20 billion by thousands of Holocaust survivors who say their money was stolen. Every day, survivors call to join the case.
My mother came from a family of 9 children. She was the only survivor. Everything was erased completely.
Yes, our parents and our siblings, and they're gonna be burned. And sure enough, we would smell that smoke coming out from that chimney.
People are dying. The depositors are dying. And the banks get rich because they take dead people's money.
The case has pitted Jewish families against some of the most powerful financial interests in the world. All tell the same story. A Swiss account opened in the 30s mysteriously vanished by the time they went looking for it.
They've all admitted to it.
Some even had proof.
Here are the numbers. Here are 4 numbers.
He claims that in one account there had been 18,000 Swiss francs, but the money had simply gone.
How much do you think that money would have been worth today? 18,000 Swiss francs.
I don't know. $1 million?
Estelle Sapir remembers the grand hotels where her wealthy father stayed in Geneva before the war, when he went to bank the family's money. She said goodbye to him through the barbed wire of a concentration camp.
I could not kiss him. He could not kiss me. He just put the fingers out, and I could kiss his hand. And the same, he could do the same thing. When nobody, I could not approach him.
He told her never to forget. She had money waiting in banks in Geneva, Zurich, and Lausanne.
I said, I have a good memory. I remember.
So there was absolutely no doubt this is where the money was?
Absolutely.
After the war, the bank produced a file with her father's name on it, but said she had improper documentation.
52 degrees under partly cloudy skies. It's 10 a.m. Today, billionaire Edgar Bronfman said he'd met with Swiss banks in an effort to recover the money of Holocaust victims. Mr. Bronfman is chairman of the Seagram Corporation and president of the World Jewish Congress.
2 years ago, Edgar Bronfman, head of the World Jewish Congress, resolved to end the suffering of people like Sapir, who today lives on memories and little else. Bronfman is a billionaire many times over. Sapir has lost everything she ever had. Bronfman would use all his power to try to recover millions of francs in Swiss banks belonging to victims of the Holocaust. On the flight to Bern, the Swiss capital, Bronfman was determined to lay bare the secret history of Switzerland.
If I can use a word that's probably not proper to use on television, we were shit disturbers. We were coming in there and roiding up their lovely little empire that they'd had for a long time, saying, I don't think that everything is as nice and clean as you think it is, and we want to find out.
At his side was Israel Singer, an ex-rabbinical student nicknamed the Rabbi. Together, they'd try to recover the missing millions.
The people who were fighting in World War II were clearly the evil and the good, and the Swiss decided to be neutral in a struggle between evil and good.
Singer and Bronfman say the Swiss bankers flung an offer on the table. Suddenly, they'd discovered some Jewish accounts, unclaimed since the war, worth $32 million. Take it or leave it, they said.
This is supposed to be the final stop, and here's the money, and take it and behave yourself. What I realized was this is going to be a tough battle.
Back in the U.S., Bronfman began to flex his political muscle.
This morning the committee meets to take up an important matter, and it involves more than money, more than millions and tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions, and maybe more than that.
Bronfman called New York Senator Al D'Amato.
But it involves the systematic...
D'Amato was chairman of the powerful Senate Banking Committee.
...of people.
For the Swiss bankers and their prized branches on Wall Street, it was a nightmare. D'Amato could, if he wished, deal a mortal blow to their worldwide operations by calling for the closure of their branches in America.
And they took that very seriously.
Yes, I think they probably did.
Bronfman smelled blood. He got President Clinton to open wartime government files on Switzerland.
For banks, the only good news is no news, and every nightmare of theirs became a reality.
The outgoing Swiss president exploded at Bronfman, accusing him of trying to destroy Switzerland as a banking center.
He also managed to call me a blackmailer and an extortionist. But this is straight paranoia to think that there's a plot afoot to destroy Switzerland and its banking system. Of course there was no plot.
At his ranch in Virginia, Bronfman pored over wartime intelligence files. Switzerland, it seemed to him, had always wrapped herself in myths of humanity, democracy, and shining purity. The reality, he believed, was different.
Switzerland paid an enormous moral price for its neutrality, and along with that, it also made others, especially Jews, pay a very different kind of a price, sometimes with their lives, certainly with their fortunes.
Swiss propaganda films showed its soldiers setting off to defend Swiss neutrality, while Swiss hotels overflowed with Nazis meeting Swiss bankers and buying enormous quantities of Swiss weapons. The war would tear Europe apart, but make Switzerland rich. Swiss soldiers sealed themselves in caves in the mountains in case of Nazi invasion. Meanwhile, its arms factories, protected from air raids by Swiss neutrality, worked overtime for the Nazis. Swiss democracy melted like snow. A seven-man federal council made its decisions in secret. Its leader, Marcel Pilet-Gola, thought only he could deal with Hitler. He lectured the Swiss on new realities, that is, that Hitler would win the war. His plan was simple. He would protect Switzerland from the Nazis by making her indispensable to Berlin.
I think one can only explain his action by thinking that Germany would win the war, and that wouldn't be a catastrophe. I think he had some understanding
for an authoritarian regime.
Didn't find an authoritarian regime like Hitler's too unacceptable?
No, I don't think he found it unacceptable.
The U.S. legation in Bern concluded that only 2 of the 7 Swiss councillors were genuinely determined to protect Swiss independence from Hitler. Thus began what the Swiss saw as a brilliant balancing act that would save Switzerland. Others saw it as simple collusion.
Sure. They made a deal. I think they call that making a pact with the devil.
It was the vastest killing machine in history, being fueled by one of the most efficient banking systems in history and by one of the most efficient quartermasters operating through that banking system.
The German mark usually wasn't accepted outside Germany. To buy weapons and raw materials, the Nazis needed hard currency, and bankers with more sophistication than scruples. They needed Switzerland.
They couldn't buy materials without Switzerland. They couldn't buy the necessary armaments. They couldn't buy all of the things that they needed for the infrastructure. They would have run out of money.
Gold looted from banks and treasuries in Nazi-occupied countries was smelted in Berlin and shuttled into Switzerland. The Swiss National Bank denied Allied claims that it was stolen. But the bank knew how much gold the Germans held officially at the start of the war, and Berlin was sending them several times that amount.
So if you sell more than you have, it must come somewhere. So it was stolen. That's absolutely clear. But you don't know exactly where, you don't know exactly how much, but you know something is not good.
There was a darker secret, too. The cost of Hitler's dreams was so immense that in the concentration camps, guards didn't even wait for people to die before stripping them of anything of value. Jewelry, hair, even gold fillings.
And my father, before they took us in to the shower rooms, they yanked out his, I call it yanked out, they pulled out his crowns from his mouth.
Gold crowns?
Gold crowns, and some, yeah, most of them were gold crowns. And if it hurt it, he couldn't, they didn't use nothing, they just had a pair of pliers, and they, like, if you tied on a horse, and this is the way they pulled it out.
The fillings were sent to the Nazi bank in Berlin to be smelted into bars.
I can't even describe you the way they were treating us. They weren't treating us like people. They were treating us like animals.
We're so desperate for this gold.
Desperate. Oh, for gold, they were, right away, they were just looking in your mouth.
The trains that brought the Jews into the camps took the plunder out in special boxes. The Swiss banks were waiting.
That's a normal banking proceeding. We are not here to ask where from you have the money. That's impossible.
U.S. intelligence files suggest gold from the concentration camps, smelted into ingots, was sent to Switzerland and sold for cash.
Absolutely, we have now documentary evidence of that. Shocking.
Of course, this is shocking, and we can just say we did not know it. Nobody knew it at that time.
Last year, the Swiss government selected Thomas Bohrer to defend its honor and its history.
He had one goal during the Second World War: survive as a nation and protect our citizens. And to achieve this goal, we had to deal with the devil. If you deal with the devil, you have to compromise, you may make mistakes. We were in a horrible situation, like a lot of other countries. Now I don't say that no mistakes were committed, that no crimes were committed, but overall, if you judge the whole government policy and the people of Switzerland, you can say they stick to certain principles well established, and these principles have also a moral ground.
As the Nazis swept through Europe, for desperate Jews fleeing the SS, Switzerland seemed their only chance of survival.
Because, you know, when you have no hope, you hold to the only theoretically possible hope. And some got through. So if some got through, you will get through. And what else? You know, there was no other hope.
It beckoned refugees like a light in the darkness.
I could see Switzerland with lights, and I was coming from a dark, occupied Europe. We can be like birds are going to lights. I did the same thing.
Seemed warm and welcoming.
Yes.
In 1939, a sign on a mountain road read, "Switzerland is the haven of the dispossessed. We acknowledge the great enrichment brought to us by homeless refugees since time immemorial." By now, it was a myth.
They gave order to reject women, men and children.
Anti-Semitism in Switzerland was rampant, was as bad as it was anywhere in Europe.
They were put in the hands of the Germans and deported to concentration camp and to Auschwitz.
On the border, posters warned desperate Jews fleeing the SS that if they entered Switzerland, they could be shot. Taking in Jews, the government thought, would only provoke the Nazis.
That might make Hitler furious, and he would decide, I have to attack those people who seem to be friendly with the Jews.
Even before the war, the files of the Nazi Foreign Ministry record that serious consideration is being given in Switzerland to blocking the flow of Jews out of Germany. To make it easier to turn them back at the border, the Swiss asked the Nazis to stamp a J in their passports.
Und man musste ein Foto haben, wo das linke Ohr ist sichtbar war, also wie für die Verbrecherkartei. Und dann musste man Fingerabdrücke geben und es ist natürlich schon sehr diskriminierend und für viele hat das bedeutet, dass sie dann einfach zurückgewiesen worden sind. Man hat sie gerade erkannt und das ist das Todesurteil gewesen.
Then and today, I consider that a shameful action as far as a neutral country is concerned.
In the lakeside town of Saint-Gingolf on the Swiss border with France, waves of refugees were turned back.
They even committed suicide at the borders in front of the Swiss police, which were very, they didn't care.
A young Jewish couple made a suicide pact on a bench in sight of peaceful Switzerland.
They decided to die together, and the man cut the throat of his wife and did the same on himself. His wife died, but he survived, and the grave is still there.
Even those who paid Swiss guides to smuggle them in got stopped. In small hotels on the border, they gave up hope.
Jumped from the windows there of those buildings where they were waiting for the night of when they understood that there would be no way of getting through, and some of them were killed by the guides. I mean, this is maybe the darkest of all those dark events, is that the guides sometimes took those refugees, killed them on the way, took their whatever they carried with them, cash or jewelry, to survive in Switzerland, and threw the bodies into the lakes.
Sometimes Swiss border guards would chain Jews together and march them back into France. Their destination was usually a death camp. Even children fell victim to the SS. Some escaped and arrived without their parents at the Swiss border.
Because there were constantly calls for Jewish children to be exterminated. And so
At first, children were allowed in, but later some were turned back.
They didn't want to remain with 20,000, 30,000 Jewish children.
The Holocaust Memorial in Israel records the case of a boy aged 6, rejected by Swiss border guards, killed at Auschwitz.
They knew exactly that between the refugees sent back were children.
And it was authorized?
Yeah, they gave order to reject women, men and children. It's written.
In 1942, a Swiss police statement claimed, "It is not true refugees face certain punishment if sent back." But some Swiss officers seemed to know exactly what was going to happen to the Jews.
The officers, they asked us, you are Jewish? And we answered, sure, we are Jewish. So if you are Jewish, you will have the same fate that have also all other Jews.
What happened to them when they were sent back?
That I think we knew. I said so. We knew that they were annihilated.
You knew that the Jews who were turned back were annihilated by the Germans?
Yeah.
Ordinary Swiss families, aware of what lay in store for the Jews, had tried to save them. A Swiss newspaper reported, "No one has the slightest doubt that refugees face certain death."
And that information was getting through to the Federal Council?
Yes.
They had no doubt the Holocaust is underway?
Yes, one didn't use this word yet. But then we used annihilation.
Annihilation of the Jews.
Unaware of Swiss policy, the Jews kept coming. Afraid of deportation to Auschwitz, Simon Sonnebend, a wealthy watch importer from Belgium, paid a smuggler to take him and his family through France into Switzerland. After a dangerous journey, the Swiss border looked like a first glimpse of paradise.
It looked very beautiful. Probably it was beautiful because I felt we were safe. It never entered in our mind that it could be anything but safety.
But the next day, staying with friends, they were arrested and put on a train back to the border to await deportation. They asked a soldier why.
And he said, well, we can't take any more refugees. We haven't got enough food for ourselves. They are short of bananas, and if they take more refugees, where will they get more food from? And that was his explanation as to why he was sending us to our death.
His father was jailed. A convent was willing to accept him, his mother, and sister until it was time to send them back across the border.
The nuns not only were willing, but they locked us in a large room. We were not allowed to go either in the courtyard or to the toilet. They were all the time accompanying us as if we were literally prisoners.
Sister Anne-Marie was one of the nuns there at the time.
Il y avait des larmes, il y avait des séparations. Beaucoup étaient séparés de leur famille. Alors c'était très triste et puis on essayait d'un peu leur faire du bien.
I was surprised because it was the first time I'd come across nuns or sisters, and they showed no compassion of any sort.
The police came to take the family away.
When we were told to come out, that means my mother and my sister and I, because we were told that my father had just been brought from the prison where he was kept while we were in the convent, and we came in the courtyard. She started crying and screaming that they couldn't take us away because she knew that it was, if we were sent back to the Germans, that we would be deported to Auschwitz, and it would be our death. She cried and screamed and fainted.
But Sister Anne-Marie says she heard of no Jews being expelled.
Eh bien, avec longtemps après, donc ces dernières années, quand on a commencé à parler de ça, à parler des Juifs. Mais autrement, on ne savait pas.
They were driven to the border with occupied France by taxi and made to pay the fare themselves.
It was 6 or 7 francs, Swiss francs.
Across the border, the SS was waiting. His mother and father were ordered onto a train to the east, the children allowed to stay in France.
The Swiss, effectively, were partners in the murder of my family.
As they said goodbye, his father told him that if he survived the war, there was a fortune awaiting him in a Swiss bank. A few days later, he heard his parents had died at Auschwitz.
And I had to pretend, because I didn't want my sister to know that I knew. I had to pretend that I didn't know.
After the war, Sonnabend discovered his father's Swiss accounts had vanished, even one mentioned in black and white in the Bern Gazette for 1942. After the family was deported, a court had awarded a business partner $200, or 472 francs, out of the account at the Kantonalbank in Bern.
So it's possible that the account of Mr. Sonnabend has been closed with this transaction.
So that means that there was an account in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
There certainly was an account. There can't be any doubt about that.
Yes.
And so approximately 472 francs was withdrawn from that account.
Mm-hmm.
And you're saying that the only money that there could be in that account was 472 francs, which is about $200.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's correct.
Doesn't seem very much, though, does it?
Not very much, no. It's quite right.
The bank invited Sonnabend to have an outside accountant search for the missing money. But the accounting firm, Arthur Anderson, came up blank.
In their report, Arthur Anderson states that there's no account left in the name of Sonnabend.
If you've lost the details, then no accountant is going to be able to find it.
Yes.
So you're acknowledging that there was once an account, but you're saying there aren't any details of that account.
That's right, yes.
Swiss banks don't always welcome inquiries about missing accounts. Switzerland keeps other records almost obsessively. Its state archive even keeps a piece of wire a Jewish refugee used to cut his veins rather than be deported. It keeps the bill for cleaning up the blood in his cell. A Frau Schmidt did it for 3 francs. Yet of thousands of missing Jewish bank accounts, like that of Simon Sonnabend, there remains not the slightest trace.
But how would you feel if this was your account? You know that there was an account. I mean, you're not denying that there was an account, and it's gone. And not only has it gone, but there isn't even any trace that it ever existed. If that was your money, wouldn't you feel a little upset?
Yes, of course, of course. But you can't change it because, as I told you, according to Swiss law, we can't preserve all the documents that has been established 40 or 50 years ago.
You can't, or you won't?
No, we can't.
It is true that our refugee policy is a darker part of our Second World War history. Indeed, we turned away 30,000 Jews and they died probably in the Holocaust. On the other hand, it also shows that light and darkness are close together. We saved 27,000 Jews, we saved 30,000 Swiss Jews. But I agree, Switzerland could have done more at that time. On the other hand, Nazi Germany threatened us very often that we are too friendly to the Jews and we're going to pay for it down the road.
During the war, Switzerland seemed oddly remote from the violence its banks were helping to finance. Bern, the Swiss capital, was full of Nazi bankers and buyers. Trainloads of paintings looted by the Nazis were being quietly auctioned at Swiss art galleries. Big German corporations like IG Farben, that worked countless slave laborers to their deaths, depended on Swiss front companies for their links with the world. Swiss dealers were buying stolen banknotes and share certificates being sent by the Nazis to their embassy in Bern. In almost every possible way, Switzerland had become vital to the Reich.
Criminals cannot function without cover. Thieves cannot function without fences. And although their objective was to protect themselves, their participation in that criminality was clear.
Swiss banks arranged financial transactions for the Nazis all over the world.
And the neutrality no longer was neutral, but became a form of participation.
Nazi weapon factories were relentlessly bombed by the Allies, but plants in neutral Switzerland were bomb-proof. They produced untold quantities of Nazi weapons without the slightest fear of attack.
There's a document which we've read, which I find curious, sent by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the Secretary of State in 1940, I believe 43, in the spring of 43. And it said that our bombing of Germany was rather ineffective because the Swiss kept shipping in the stuff to replace it.
The head of the Nazi state bank freely admitted that the Reich couldn't survive without the services of Switzerland, particularly not the conversion of gold into hard currency, for more than 2 months. Banks in other neutral countries weren't nearly as sophisticated.
They were producing those gears that kept that machine rolling, and had there not been that machine rolling, the war would have been considerably shorter. The number of deaths would have been considerably smaller, and not just Jewish deaths, but American and British soldiers would have died in smaller numbers. The amount of vast murder committed without any rationality would have been far less. There's just no question about it.
This is a totally absurd accusation. There is no statistic, there is nothing who proves that. And that's the reason why historians, Swiss historians, say it's absurd, if you look at the historical facts.
But we have German officials themselves saying literally that we would not have been able to continue for more than 2 months without the conversion of gold into hard currency by the Swiss.
This is, if you can never base historical thesis on one fact or on one document or one saying. You need a lot of proofs.
Zum Aufsitzen! Weg!
There were still those who thought Hitler was too afraid of the Swiss army to invade. Indeed, Switzerland had built fortifications high in the mountains and mined the Alpine passes. But the directors of the Swiss National Bank boasted at a private meeting, "We have escaped the war because of the services we have been able to offer Germany." Reinhard Spitzy, once in German army intelligence, says the Nazis would never have killed its golden goose.
Because it is so clear that we needed Switzerland as a place for money, a place for production, a place for certain special armament, but invasion and occupation, that was out of question, I think.
3 rote Rosen gab sie mir mit ihrer.
In Spitzy's view, the Swiss were less afraid of Nazi invasion than they pretended.
The Swiss said to the Allies they must behave like they behaved because of the danger of entering the Germans. But they meant another thing. They meant that they would lose the business with Germany, no? I think that was an excuse.
Squeezed between Germany and fascist Italy, Switzerland was forced to compromise. She allowed the Nazis to send trains every 10 minutes through Switzerland to Italy. Its men at war, the Reich went looking for slave labor to keep its factories running. Italian partisans fought back, but the Nazis rounded up thousands of Italians and sent them north. They would work as Germany's slaves. It was a journey from which many would never return.
These people were put in these trains, and the trains were locked up with seals. There were big wagons, actually, wagons where cattle goes, you know, not really passenger wagons. And these trains, with the people, went through Switzerland.
A number of Swiss railway workers have told us they were ordered to keep the slave labor trains absolutely secret.
Ab und zu hat man das etwa Hilferuf gehört, aber das ist also minim gesehen. Die sind natürlich auch vom Ausgangsbahnhof Gasso sind die vorgemeldet worden und man hat dann die mit einer gewissen Sorgfalt müssen behandeln, dass sie schlankenweg wieder zu der Schweiz ausgekommen sind.
We found no trace of the trains in Swiss railway records. Italian Jews were invariably sent to the death camps on trains across the Brenner Pass into Nazi-controlled Austria. But in late 1943, the Brenner was closed. That same winter, we're told, long trains with sealed cattle cars began to roll into Zurich main station in the dead of night.
I think the whole thing was rather undercover. I think maybe other than Jewish people, not many people knew about these transports.
They may have been Germany's slave laborers, but several witnesses we found insist there were Jews on the trains, on their way to the camps. Even 50 years later, they're afraid to discuss what they see as a dangerous secret. All fear repercussions. Only one dared to speak on the record.
There was a Red Cross official, the lady, who told us the trains would come in at night, that we were supposed to bring flashlights, that we would be in teams of 4.
Members of the Zurich Jewish community, it's claimed, were asked to take soup to Platform 1 at midnight.
Very slowly, these cars came and stopped, and a man came out on our station, and one of the recollections I had is, although it was very dark, when this car opened, the man or the face who peeked out was very white. It was very tense. And I also remember I thought, what would happen if all of a sudden all these people pushed this man aside and came tumbling out of the car? And I was worried. In a way, I wished they would be free, but in a way, I didn't want them to come out.
This woman, then age 14, claims she passed soup forward to the man in the cattle car.
We knew that they were going to Germany. We knew they were Jews. We knew about the concentration camps.
If true, her story for the first time would connect Switzerland directly with the Holocaust.
This type of thing always troubled me. And even today, when I have to review it, it's very troublesome. At that time, I didn't feel responsible, but later on, I think I felt responsible.
We found no record at Swiss railways of trains with prisoners going through Zurich that winter. The Red Cross also says it can find no record of aiding prisoners on trains going through Switzerland. But there were trains. The question is, who was on them, and where were they going?
I have checked with historians. There is again no documentation, no proof to this allegation. And also in Switzerland, we do not have any witnesses. And I think it would be very difficult to hide this kind of transportation in a free country. And Switzerland was a free country even at that time.
Switzerland emerged from the war one of the richest countries in the world. Bank deposits had gone up nearly 3 times, and it now held huge gold reserves. It had played a delicate, dangerous game, but it had come through rich and free.
But now, when you look back, possibly it was wise, so not very beautiful to do what was done.
Well, it worked. Turned Switzerland into a very prosperous country.
Yeah.
After the war, the Allies demanded a share of the looted gold, but at bitter negotiations in Washington, the Swiss offered far less than the Allies wanted. But Allied interest in punishing the Swiss was soon eclipsed by the new reality, the Cold War. The West needed a strong Germany and a strong Switzerland, and issues of looted gold were soon forgotten. Forgotten, too, was the fate of the Swiss bank deposits of Jews who died in concentration camps.
The money disappeared once the word came out that all the Jews were dead. Let's draw our own conclusions.
By the end of the war, Swiss bankers and lawyers certainly knew that their clients were not going to return. Soberly dressed men, lawyers and accountants engaged by Jews before the war to look after their accounts, showed up at Swiss banks to withdraw their dead clients' money.
If he knows his client is dead, he will not be so silly to let some money in the bank. He will withdraw some money, and probably if he is clever, he put it in another bank.
Well,
under his name.
Steal it. He'd steal it.
Yeah. You cannot say it's not, in fact, you cannot say he's stealing it because he has authorization. Huh?
Well, that's a very fine point. It may be legally correct, but morally it's theft, isn't it?
Yeah, but you have a lot of these cases without any choice. We have to give the money.
Privately, the banks blame the lawyers and accountants. They in turn blame the banks. Pressed by the Swiss government, the bankers would admit to holding very few assets of Holocaust victims. But in the 50s, Walter Stuckey, the chief Swiss negotiator in Washington, broke ranks with the bankers. He said 2 bankers had confessed to him that the banks were holding hundreds of millions belonging to French Jews alone. In 1959, the president of the Swiss Federal Court, Harold Huber, wrote much the same. A banking expert has informed me that hundreds of millions owned by the missing persons are still in the banks. Today, lawyers insist that the only way individuals will ever get what's theirs is by suing the banks. The $20 billion suit is making its way through the courts.
There's no disharmony. I know I'm going to get justice for these people. I know the banks are going to pay. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when and how much. What happened? That's what happened.
By raising the ghosts of Switzerland's past, Edgar Bronfman gave people the courage to confront the Swiss banks.
And to you, this is not about money, ultimately?
No, this is about justice. This is about justice. This is about restitution in terms of moral first and also financial, because you cannot be allowed to profit from murder.
Under astonishing pressure, Switzerland finally backed down. There would be a bankers' fund for Holocaust survivors and a government fund for the victims of catastrophes and human rights violations. But half the money has to be spent in Switzerland, and it all has to be approved by a referendum next year.
The whole glare of world publicity is now on Switzerland and on its effort to reestablish itself as a moral, decent country. I can't think of anything that could be worse for them than to go back on what they have promised to do.
We are not a special country. A lot of Swiss still believe that we are very different, but a lot of Swiss have to learn now that we were already in the past very much like other countries. We had in Switzerland good people and bad people, and we behaved not more bold than other nations.
So the myth is shattered?
I think it's like often every myth has a lot of fiction, and in the myth about Switzerland there was also fiction involved, and now we see a real picture about Switzerland.